Good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. I am excited to be continuing in our series on Sabotage. I want to start out with just a question. It's a trivia question. Does anyone in the room know who Ron Wayne is? Anyone? No? Oh, yeah, okay. Back in the tech booth, they know. Here's the thing. You probably have never heard of Ron Wayne, but I guarantee you that you have heard of his business partner. His business partner, he actually had two, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Ron Wayne was actually the third co-founder of Apple. When Apple was founded, there were three co-founders, Wozniak and Jobs, and then this guy named Ron Wayne. However, in 1976, 12 days after Apple was founded, Ron Wayne sold his 10% ownership stake in Apple for $800 to Jobs and Wozniak. $800. I was just like, rough math, it'd be worth somewhere around $100 billion today. Not 100 million, $100 billion. He gave it away, basically, for $800 because Wozniak and Jobs were both young men in their early 20s. Ron Wayne had already had a fairly successful business career. He had some assets that he wanted to protect. And so in the interest of protecting those assets, in the event that the company took on debt and went upside down, and they were going to go after, somebody was going to come after his assets, right? So he was like, nope, I don't want that. You young guys, you go have your fun, whatever, we'll see what happens. And so he ended up selling 10%, his entire ownership stake in Apple for $800. Why? Well, one, who knew, right? Who could have possibly known? And it's easy to look back on it and say, oh my gosh, what a crazy, crazy mistake. But I don't know about you, but I've made some choices in my life, some investments of, my money and some investments of my time that I've looked back on later on and been like, that was a really dumb decision. I shouldn't have done that. But in the moment, well, probably most of mine you could have known better. But at any rate, there's this moment where he undervalued something that was going to become incredibly, incredibly valuable, right? And as we're talking about sabotage and how we sometimes relationally sabotage ourselves, right? As we're looking at our relationships and the ways in which we can sabotage those relationships. Last week, Scott kicked off the series talking about how we can work on ourselves because we are the common denominator in every relationship that we have. It's us, right? This week, we're going to take a look at another way we can sabotage our relationships, and that is by becoming complacent. By undervaluing the thing that, quite frankly, ends up becoming one of the most important things in our lives, which is our relationships. And what could be more important than the people that we actually know and love? In fact, if you look up Ron Wayne later on today, you want to do a YouTube search for him, you'll find that he actually says, even to this day, that he does not regret selling his interest in Apple because he knows that it would have cost him a whole bunch of time, effort, and energy, and he would have been stressed out and unable to focus on his relationships. And he said it was a good trade because he was able to actually invest in his family. And so how can we, as people, make sure that we don't take for granted, that we don't become complacent in the relationships that we have? Because if you're anything like me, you know that not only is it easy to treat the people that we are closest to the worst, but it's also easy to take for granted the people who we assume are always going to be there, who are always going to be a part of our lives, or the people that we're most familiar with that we see every single day. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, Moses is praying, and he's praying for the people of Israel. This is toward the end of his life. And he says this. He says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Moses' life is a really, really interesting one. He kind of lives almost 3 lives. There's the first 40 years of his life where he is a prince of Egypt. If you've ever seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about, right? He's living the life, right? He is a son of Pharaoh. He is wealthy and has everything he could ever possibly want. And then he begins to struggle with his identity, ends up making a big mistake, killing somebody, and fleeing for his life, and spends the next 40 years of his life in the desert as a shepherd. And then God calls him to come back to Egypt to lead his people out of slavery and into the promised land. And so Moses goes back, and if you've ever read Moses' story at all in Genesis and Exodus, and it is an incredible life that Moses lives. But in the end, the thing that God called him to was not something that he ended up getting to do, because he was distracted from the thing that God had called him to do, which was to love God first and then love the people around him. And so he and the people of Israel, there's a whole generation that don't actually get to go into the promised land. And toward the end of his life, we believe this prayer of Moses is recorded, that God would teach him and his people, both the generation that wasn't going to get to go into the promised land because they'd taken their eyes off of God and become distracted and treated one another poorly as a result of that, and the generation that was to come, that was hopefully going to go into the promised land, that they would have the ability to see that their time is limited, and that they would then invest their time and their life well, that they would have wisdom to be able to do that. And so, as we think about investing our lives well, it's an easy thing, at least for me, it's an easy thing for me to sort of pontificate on a Sunday about how to do that, right? Here's what I want to do, right? To talk about the ways in which I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good son and a good brother, and and all of these things. It's easy to sort of say those things out loud, but the reality is it's easier still, I think, to become distracted. To take my eyes off of the things that would help me actually be a good husband, a good father, a good sibling, a good child. And so how do we begin to build in some rhythms in our relationships that allow us to operate with wisdom, that allow us to actually live in a way that we want to live, because there are so many distractions. The people of Israel, as they're heading out of Egypt and into the promised land, they are just constantly distracted. If you read their story, it's like one distraction after another. They turn away from God. God finally says, hey, listen, you're not going to get to go into the promised land. And I don't know about you, but I can't think of a more relatable thing in the life of ancient people than being distracted. In my life, I find that there are so many distractions. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly being distracted from the things that I care the most about, or that I say I care the most about, and struggle to actually invest in those things. And so how do we do that? How do we actually make those investments wisely? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to take into account the things that truly do matter. And so maybe this morning, I did a sermon series over the summer with Foundry where we talked about turning off our phones and stuff. We talked about how our attention is manipulated and managed by all kinds of crazy technology and stuff, which is funny because I actually lead a tech company now. But this morning, what I'd love to invite you to do is get your phone out. Because I want to give you some practical examples of how we can actually do this together. And maybe it just simply starts by this. You could get your phone out, you can get a piece of paper out, that type of thing, but just make a list, which sounds overly simplistic, but make a list of the people who matter the most to you. And then put that list in a place where you're going to see it every single day. Like, I would, on my list, it literally says the most important people in the world to me are. And then I just made a list, and here's like a little fun, I'm gonna give you a whole bunch of like, here's how you can actually practically apply this today. But I literally saved it and put it on my phone, and it's gonna be like the backdrop of my phone. When I open my phone, that's what I'll see. Like, okay, here's the list. I've got another thing on there right now. I'll tell you about that in a second. But that's a good place to put that. And then once you've got that list, and obviously, I think we could all pretty quickly make that list right now. But I want to give you a couple of signs that you might be in danger of relational complacency. And so if you've got a couple people in mind and you say, these are the most important relationships in my life, let me just ask you a few questions about those relationships, and let's see where you would say you're at. Like, maybe give yourself a rating of like, hey, how complacent am I? How attentive am I to this relationship? So the first would be how often you communicate with these people. Now, it's easy to, say, oh, well, I communicate with my wife every day while we're watching Netflix. Like that's not the same thing. I mean, like, how often do you communicate in a way that's actually meaningful, in a way that is actually helping you connect with that person beyond just, exchange of information in order to get something done, right? How often are you communicating with that person? It's a good indication of like, is it mostly just, hey, here's what it takes to get through our day? Or is it actually something that you would say, no, I'm actually like engaged in real relationship with this person? Another one would be, how much effort are you putting into your relationship with this person on like a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis? Obviously, we all have different kinds of relationships that we interact with people differently, but how much effort are you putting in on a daily, weekly, monthly relationship basis? Next, how predictable is your relationship with this person? Like, are you just stuck in a routine where you are just doing the same things over and over and over again? If so, maybe you're starting to fall into complacency in that relationship. Next, are there things that you need to talk about with this person that you're avoiding? Like, is there unresolved conflict? Is there bitterness between you? Is there something standing in between you that you actually need to step into, be brave, and have that conversation? Next, how much do you assume this person is going to be with you tomorrow, next month, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? It's really easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, I'm going to be with you forever. Like, we're gonna be, for my wife and I, we're gonna be together forever. But the reality is we don't know that. We don't know that that's true. And so if you're thinking, oh yeah, like, I'm going to see this person every day for the rest of my life, like, it's an easy way for us to begin to lose track of how important that person is and how valuable your relationship with them is. Next, how often are you sharing something that goes beyond the surface level? Like, are you being vulnerable with one another? Are you engaging with one another on things that go way beyond just like, oh, the weather's great outside today, which, by the way, it is. Next, are you ignoring or missing important dates in your life? Like, my wife and I, our 20th anniversary is coming up, and not too much longer. And I have like literally started just like putting on my calendar reminders that that's going to happen, and that if it happens and I haven't done something highly significant, that I am going to be in big, big trouble, right? Like, what are the dates that matter? And are you paying attention to those things? And are you making plans? That would be kind of a tag on to that of like, are you making plans not just for the big things, but also for the regular things that the everyday, every week. Like, hey, are you like, hey, this person's highly important to me. I'm going to make an investment in our relationship. I'm going to plan something to be together, that type of thing, or to just jump on the phone. And then lastly, a good indicator of like, hey, is complacency creeping into this relationship would be, are you satisfied with minimal interaction? Are you satisfied with interaction that is not, it's just like, oh, okay, you exist still and I exist. Good enough. Like, are you satisfied with never getting below the surface level of things? And so if you have relationships that you would say, like, okay, like on a scale of, 1 to 10, I'm feeling like I'm kind of in the 1, let's call 1 complacency, and 10 is like, this is the best relationship of my whole life. Like, where would you rank each one of them? And if you were to make a list and then to go through and say, like, where are we in this? What are we going to do about that, though? Like, that's the next piece of this, right? Like, how are we going to actually make our relationships better? Moses reminds us, right? Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so how do we actually apply that to our relationships? Somebody once said that children spell love T-I-M-E. But I don't think that's just a children thing. It's a human thing. We spell love T-I-M-E, and so how are we going to take our time and invest it well in the lives of people who we would say are the most important to us? I want to give you a couple ways that we can actually do that. The first is this, to keep them in the forefront of your mind. So if you've got that list, you put it on your phone, you put it on your mirror so you see it every morning, put it in your car, that type of thing. Put it in a place where you're going to see it regularly. Draw attention to the people who matter most to you and remind yourself that they actually do matter and that it's super easy for us to take them for granted. One of the ways that Apple does this, thank you, Steve, and not Ron. But one of the ways that Apple does this for me is on my phone, I have a little widget that like goes through my pictures. And you can set it to do certain things, like you can set it to show you certain people. And so one of the cool things that my phone does for me is it reminds me on the regular, every single day, about the people that matter the most to me. And I want to show you an example of this. One of the best ways to remind yourself of the people that matter most is to see them over time. So I've got a picture of my kids here, but this is them a long time ago, as you will see shortly. So I've got the next one, right? Like this, that other one was on my phone this morning, actually. Then I've got this one. This one's from a couple years ago. And then I've got this next one. And it's just the worst thing that Apple does because it just crushes my soul every day to be like, oh my gosh, my kids are getting older. Like, time is a real thing. It is not just some like abstract construct. It's happening to us, right? But this is a great way to remind yourself of like, oh, the people that matter most to me, like my time with them is limited. My oldest daughter is now 15 and a half years old. She is going to be driving soon, which I'm not actually all that worried about for her. I'm worried for you a little, but not for her. I'm just kidding. I'm not worried for you either. She's going to be a great driver. She's a freshman in high school. I have 4 years with her before she's going to go do whatever's next. And that is a terrifying thing to me. But it's the good kind of terror that's like, oh, I need to pay attention. My time is limited. I want to make good investments. How can I pay attention to the people that matter most to me? And how can I be intentional in the way in which I actually invest in them? And that is to simply use my time wisely to do that. And the good news is you don't have to do it doesn't have to be these like grandiose things that we do, right? It can be very, very simple, small efforts along the way that build our relationships and help them to stay healthy and strong and connected and keep us from a place of complacency. And so let me give you a few different ways that we can do this. And this is just like super, I'm trying to be crazy practical about how we can actually invest in our relationships with one another and those who matter most to us. The first thing I would say is to just schedule things, right? Like schedule don't just say it, put it on your calendar. Or if you've got like a reminders app on your phone, put it as a reminder that recurs over and over and over again on your calendar. And if you're like me, put something on that reminder or on that calendar thing that says like, don't be an idiot or something. Like it really gets my attention, right? You shouldn't do that. But for me, that's what I put on there. It's like, don't be an idiot. This is what matters most. Because it's easy for me to work until 7 at night and get up the next morning and start working again and completely neglect my relationships with my people who matter most in my life, right? It's easy for me to then be like, I am exhausted because I have now overworked, and so I'm just gonna sit here and watch a show, or I'm gonna like do the thing that I do every single night, which is make an excuse to watch a show by doing the dishes, which is a slightly better version of watching a show, but not really that much better because I'm just watching a show. That's really all I'm doing. But you got to schedule it. Put it into your calendar. Make it something that draws your attention back to the importance of these relationships. And then when you schedule it, schedule things like making the call. Call the people that matter most to you. It'll freak them out because you probably, if you're like me at all, only text them, right? And they'll be like, why are you calling me? Maybe not. Maybe it's just me that does only text. But make a call. Express gratitude in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's a text message. Maybe it's a little tiny handwritten note. We have this jar that lives in our house, and it's got the word gratitude on it. A friend of ours gave it to us, and it has these little cards that say gratitude on the front, and they're so small that you can literally not write more than one sentence in them, which is great, because I hate to write things. But it's a really cool thing that you can just like write a quick, even just a word, and leave it for somebody. And then in our house, you just throw that in the jar if you want it to live in the jar. Some of us keep them in our other places in our house too, to, just as a nice little thing. But just to simply express gratitude. It doesn't have to be this large lift of like, I'm going to write you a letter that tells you all the things that I appreciate about you. It can be as simple as a few words on a sticky note. Schedule acts of kindness. If the people in your life are people who, have that love language of acts of service, how can you serve them in simple ways? How can you show them how you care for them and with what you do in your actions? Next, eliminate distractions. This kind of goes back to the washing the dishes while watching a show thing. It's really easy for me, I don't know about you, but it's really easy for me to like consider being with my family as like, oh, I'm in the room, I'm doing something else, I'm thinking about something else, I've got 1,000 things going on in my head, but I'm in the room, so this counts, right? And the reality is like, that's not how I want to be treated. That's not how they want to be treated. And so how can you set time aside where you like turn your phone off, turn the TV off, and just be together? Next, just simply ask how someone is doing. And when they say good or fine, say, no, really, like how are you actually doing? Like what's going on inside of you? What are you thinking about? What are you excited about? What are you afraid of? Ask questions that help you get below the surface. And as we invest in our relationships in this way, what we'll find is that the quality of our relationships will radically improve, that we will be able to stave off relational complacency, and that we'll be able to invest in the things that matter most to us. and that by doing that, our lives will be better. It's so easy to be distracted. And if we want to avoid missing out on investing in a thing that truly is valuable, we've got to pay attention and we've got to be intentional. We're going to head into a time of communion, receiving communion this morning. And as we do, I want to invite you to take a little bit of an extended time to reflect this morning before we do that. Every week at Foundry, we receive communion. It's this incredible reminder, it's this tangible reminder of God's love for us, demonstrated by sending his son Jesus to come and pay the price for our brokenness, for the baggage that we carry, so that we could be restored to a relationship with him, so that we could be, so we can be restored in relationship with one another. And the beautiful thing about communion is it's this very, very tangible reminder of God's love. And I think one of the reasons Jesus set it up this way, that it would be an actual eating and drinking, is to remind us that God's love isn't intended to be just a us and him thing, that it's intended to be something that actually empowers us to love others. And so as we get ready to and prepare our hearts to receive communion, one of the things I want to just invite you into is a time of reflection. Like, who are the people in your life that need to experience God's love through you? Who are the people that matter most to you? And maybe God would even lead you to make a note, write something down of like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give us a couple moments to just silently reflect on that, and then I'll pray for us, and we can receive communion this morning. Take some time, reflect, and we'll receive communion. God, as we come to receive from you the thing that we need, restoration of our relationship with you, as we come, we celebrate and remind ourselves and are grateful for the fact that you loved us so much that you sent your only Son to come and to rescue us. That he entered into our brokenness, that he showed us how to love one another and how to be intentional in relationship by the way he lived. And as we receive communion, we are reminded of Jesus' broken body and shed blood, but we are also reminded of the hope of resurrection, that it's not just that he paid the price, but that he proved that he had the power over sin and death by rising from the grave. And we are grateful, Lord, that that power is at work in our lives. And as we come to receive from you this morning, we pray that you would help us to know just how loved we are, and that your love flowing into our lives would then flow into the lives of the people who you've called us to love, the people who are most important to us, to our neighbors, to our coworkers. Thank you for Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.